My parents despised me when I ran away and opened my own gym. They robbed and vandalized it because they were envious of my achievements in life. I'm not even sure where to begin. I suppose, like most people, I didn't choose my family. I was born into chaos. A deep, ingrained chaos within our home's walls. It felt like I was breathing poisonous air. My parents were monsters. I understand how that sounds, like something from a bad movie. But this is the truth. They did not wear masks or have fangs, but they were cruelty experts, and they found every way to make my life miserable for as long as I can recall. I was the punching bag, literally and metaphorically. My father was a domineering brute with a commanding voice who could silence a room with a single word. He was not physically imposing, short and stocky, with graying hair, but it was how he carried himself. The coldness in his eyes caused everyone to shrink in his presence. He did not hit me often. No. He preferred more subtle forms of abuse, psychological games in which he undermined every accomplishment and mocked every failure. You are not worth anything. You are aware of this. He'd respond with a twisted smile. You will never be more than the dirt under my shoes. My mother wasn't doing any better. If my father were a storm, my mother was like a constant drizzle, soaking through every layer, making sure you're never dry. She was manipulative, constantly twisting the truth to her advantage, to the outside world. She was the victim, a fragile, nervous woman trapped in an unhappy marriage. But behind closed doors, she'd sit and watch as my father ripped me apart. Never stepped in to protect me. She would sometimes encourage it with a soft touch. He needs to understand his place. There was not a single moment of peace in that home. My room became my haven. But even that wasn't enough. I could hear them yell. The constant accusations, the slamming of doors, and worst of all, the periods of total silence. Silence was dangerous. It meant they were plotting their next attack, or worse, devising new ways to make me feel even smaller. School was no better. I was always the kid with his head down, attempting to avoid attention. I realized early on that people could sense weakness. The other kids picked up on it too. I was always the quiet one, the person who didn't quite fit in. My clothes were never correct. We did not have much money, or so they told me. I wore clothes handed down from cousins I'd never met. Clothing that never quite fits. Always slightly too big or too small. I remember vividly my first day of school. I hoped that school would be different. I had dreams, you know. I assumed I'd make friends. Escape for a few hours from my nightmare of a home. But it was clear from the moment I stepped off the bus that I wouldn't be getting a fresh start. The kids sneered and whispered behind my back. What about the teachers? They didn't care. I was just another face in a crowd of students. I became invisible. That is how I survived. I learned to blend in and never stand out. I became the kid who sat in the back of the classroom, never raising his hand or speaking unless asked. It worked for a while. I slipped under the radar, going unnoticed by both bullies and teachers. But it did not last. Tyler was the only kid. He was everything. I wasn't popular or outgoing, the kind of kid who had everything. He took one look at me and decided I was his next project. Every day, he found a new way to humiliate me, whether it was tripping me down the hallway or making jokes about my clothes. He never gave up. I tried to avoid him, but he seemed to have a knack for detecting misery. He always found me, always had something cruel to say. My parents didn't care. When I told my mom about Tyler, she simply sighed and said, "Boys will be boys." My father. He laughed. Perhaps if you weren't such a weakling, they'd leave you alone. I began to believe them. Perhaps I was the problem. Maybe if I was stronger and better, things would be different. By the time I reached high school, I had mastered the art of disappearing. I went to class, finished my homework, and kept my head down. But inside, I was screaming. I wanted to get out. I wanted to run, leave everything behind, and start over. But I had no idea that college had become my only hope, my ticket out of that house and away from the hell that had become my existence. I applied to as many schools as I could. They didn't care where they were or what they were offering. I simply needed an escape. When the acceptance letters started arriving, I couldn't believe it. I had options. For the first time in my life, I had options. However, my parents had to ruin that as well. "You'll go to a community college," my father said, his voice full of disdain. "We will not pay for you to live in a dorm and waste our money." I could not breathe. The walls were closing in. I had done everything I was supposed to do, and they still planned to trap me. I considered giving up, accepting my fate, and living the rest of my life under their thumb. But then I realized something. I didn't need them. I did not need their approval, money, or permission. I could handle this on my own. So I left. It was not a dramatic midnight escape. No, I waited until the day following my high school graduation. I packed the few belongings I had into my beat-up car and drove away. I did not say goodbye. They didn't even realize I was gone. The city was supposed to be my new beginning. I found a tiny apartment, nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with creaky floors and thin walls. But it was mine. I paid for it with money I earned from a part-time job at a diner. It wasn't much, but it was sufficient, enough to keep me afloat while I worked out what to do next. College was different. I imagined it would be a magical place where everything changed. But it wasn't. I was still myself, carrying the burden of everything that had happened. But at least I was free. No more constant fear. No more walking on eggshells around my parents. I could finally breathe, even though it felt heavy and uncertain. University was not easy. I had no support system, no one to turn to when other students called home for tuition or textbook assistance. I was barely getting by on student loans and whatever I could save for my job. The classes were harder than I expected, and I quickly realized I was falling behind. I did not have the same foundation as everyone else. They had spent their high school years planning for this. I had spent my life trying to survive, but I worked hard. I studied every night and stayed awake until early in the morning, determined to succeed. I couldn't fail if I tried. I had nothing, so I kept going. Even when it seemed impossible, and I felt like I was drowning, I forced myself to keep moving forward. Then something strange occurred. I began to succeed. Slowly, bit by bit. I was getting better. My grades improved, and for the first time in my life, I was not completely invisible. I was doing well. People began to notice. Professors complimented my work. My classmates requested that we study together. And for once, I felt as if I belonged somewhere. But of course, life was not finished throwing curveballs at me, just as things began to look up. My father called. I hadn't spoken with him in months, not since I left. But there he was, on the other end of the line. His voice was as cold as always. "We need you to return." I laughed, really laughed. The thought of returning to that house, to that life after everything I had fought for, was absurd. But he was not joking. My mother was sick. He said she needed help. Despite everything, despite the pain they had caused me, a part of me still felt responsible. It still felt like I owed them something. I did not go. I could not. If I returned, I was certain I would never leave again. Graduation happened faster than I expected. It was a blur of exams, late-night study sessions, and last-minute papers, but I made it. I walked across the stage, received my diploma, and for the first time in my life, I felt proud. Not because of the paper in my hand, but because I had completed it. I'd escaped. I had survived. But even as I moved my tassel from one side to the other, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't finished. That I hadn't really escaped. The shadows of my past followed me wherever I went. I could change cities, schools, and everything. But they were always present, lurking in the background. So here I am in a new city, with a degree in hand, but no idea what to do next. I thought getting away would be sufficient. I figured leaving that house would set me free, but I'm realizing that running away isn't the easiest way to achieve freedom. It's something you must fight for every day. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know one thing for certain. I am not going back, not ever. I will figure it out, take one step at a time. But I am done being their victim. I'm done being invisible. It's time to start living for myself. After graduation, I was left with a gaping void of uncertainty. This is strange. I had spent my entire life attempting to escape, and when I finally did, the freedom was unsettling. For the first time in my life, no one was telling me what I should do or how to live. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. I have my degree in hand. I had no intention of going back to the hell I had fled. I didn't have much money, and my student loans were already starting to pile up, but I was determined not to let that stop me. I received a few job offers, none of which were particularly appealing, but they were better than nothing. So I took a job as a fitness consultant at a small, struggling gym on the outskirts of town. It wasn't exactly what I had hoped for myself, but it was a start. When I first started out, the gym wasn't very big. It was in a dilapidated building with outdated equipment and a clientele that seemed to dwindle by the day. The owner, Frank, was nearing retirement and barely hanging on. He had been in the business for over 30 years, and while he knew how to run a gym, he had no idea how to market it or attract new customers. On my first day, I entered a nearly empty gymnasium. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the cracked floors and rusted weights. The place reeked of sweat and desperation, and I knew I had a difficult task ahead of me. But something about the challenge intrigued me. It wasn't just a job, but an opportunity. Frank was not particularly interested in hearing my ideas. He was a traditionalist who rejected social media and advertising, but I wasn't about to let that stop me. I started small, updating the gym's website, setting up a Facebook page, and posting regular updates. I knew that in order to get people in the door, we needed to make the gym feel alive and connected to the community. I spent every spare moment brainstorming new ideas, offering free fitness classes in the park, conducting promotions for local businesses, and organizing charitable events. People began to arrive slowly but steadily. It was not much at first. There are only a few new members, but there was progress. I also began to apply some of what I had learned in college. My degree was not in business, but I had taken a few courses that provided a solid foundation in marketing and management. I began to realize that the gym is more than just a job. It was a puzzle, and I was determined to solve it. As the gym gained traction, I took on more responsibilities. Frank, who was initially skeptical of my ideas, came to trust me more. He noticed the numbers improving, and for the first time in years, the gym was making a profit. It wasn't much, but it was adequate to keep the doors open. After about a year, Frank decided to retire. He'd been talking about it for a while, but I didn't expect him to follow through. He summoned me to his office and informed me that he was finished. "I'm too old for this," he said, leaning back in his chair and sighing. "The gym looks better than it has in years thanks to you. I want to sell it, and I believe you should purchase it." I was astounded by the gym. Me? I'd never considered the possibility. I was barely getting by as it was. I couldn't afford to buy a business. But Frank didn't ask for much. He didn't need the money. He just wanted to make sure the gym was in capable hands. "I'll make you a deal," he said, grinning. "I understand you don't have a lot of cash, so we'll set up a payment plan. You can repay me over the next several years. But you have to promise me one thing. Keep this place alive." I didn't have to think twice. I jumped at the opportunity. It wouldn't be easy, but I was confident I could do it. I'd already proven to myself that I could turn things around, and now I had the opportunity to create something on my own. The following few years were a blur of hard work and sleepless nights. Owning a business was very different from working for one. I was in charge of everything: bills, marketing, staff, and clients, which I had to learn on the fly. However, I was not afraid of hard work. I thrived on it. The gym was my baby, and I was determined to see it succeed. I put everything I had into it. Working 12-hour days with barely a day off, I upgraded the equipment, repainted the walls, and gave the entire place a much-needed facelift. I hired a few new trainers who were equally enthusiastic about fitness as I was, and together, we began to build a community. The gym wasn't just for working out. It became a hub for people looking to improve their lives. One of the new trainers I hired was named Jordan. He was a little younger than me, having just graduated from college, but he exuded a certain energy that I enjoyed. He was excellent with people, constantly cracking jokes and keeping things light. He quickly became one of the gym's most popular trainers, with his classes always full. Jordan and I quickly became friends. We had much in common. Both of us had grown up in difficult circumstances, and we were both determined to make something of ourselves. After the gym closed, we spent many late nights discussing our future plans. Jordan had big dreams. He aspired to own his own gym one day, but for the time being, he was content to assist me in building mine. The gym continued to expand. Word of mouth spread, and we soon had new members joining every week. I began investing more in advertising, running Facebook and Instagram ads, collaborating with local businesses, and even sponsoring a few community events. The results were incredible. Within a year, our membership had doubled, allowing me to hire more staff and expand the gym even further. However, success was not without its challenges. As the gym expanded, so did the competition. Other gyms began to pop up in the area, attempting to capitalize on the city's fitness trend. Some of them were large chains with deep pockets, and I knew I couldn't compete with their marketing budgets or expensive equipment. But I had something that they didn't: a loyal community. People did not come to my gym because of its equipment or amenities. They came because they believed they belonged. The first shocking event that changed everything occurred. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Friday evening, and the gym was full. Jordan was teaching a class in the back, and I was at the front desk speaking with a few members. That was when I heard the crash. It was loud, as if something heavy had fallen, and then people screamed. My heart dropped, and I dashed toward the noise. When I reached the back of the gym, I discovered Jordan unconscious on the floor. One of the large weight machines had collapsed and landed directly on top of him. There was blood everywhere. The following few minutes were a blur. Someone called 911, and we did everything we could to assist Jordan until paramedics arrived, but the situation did not look good. His leg was crushed, and he had a deep cut on his head. I stood helpless as they loaded him into an ambulance and rushed him to the hospital. I followed the ambulance to the hospital. My mind raced. How does this happen? The equipment was brand new. We had just upgraded everything a few months earlier. I had ensured that everything was properly installed and that it was safe. But something had gone very wrong. Jordan was in surgery for several hours. I sat in the waiting room, my stomach in knots, praying that he'd be fine. Finally, a doctor appeared and informed me that he was stable, but his injuries were severe. He suffered a traumatic brain injury, and his leg was so badly damaged that they didn't know if he'd ever walk again, let alone train. The guilt was overwhelming. I blamed myself for what occurred. If I had inspected the equipment more thoroughly, if I had been more diligent, perhaps this could have been avoided. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I had failed him. The next few weeks were some of the most difficult of my life. The gym remained open, but it wasn't the same without Jordan. The accident shook members and caused some to leave. Concerned that the gym was unsafe, I did everything I could to reassure them. Bringing in inspectors to inspect every piece of equipment and ensure it was up to code. But the damage had been done. Jordan thankfully survived, but he was not the same. His leg would never completely heal, and he had to go through months of physical therapy. The doctors said he might be able to walk again, but he would never be able to train like before. It broke my heart to see him that way. This guy, who had been so energetic and passionate about fitness, had been reduced to a shell of himself. I saw him every day in the hospital, and we talked about the gym, life, and everything. He told me not to blame myself, and that it was not my fault, but I couldn't get rid of the guilt. I promised him I'd keep the gym going. I'd make it the best in the city, not for myself, but for him. So that is what I did. I went into the gym with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just building it for myself anymore. I was building it for Jordan, for everyone who has believed in me since the beginning. I worked harder than ever, investing in new equipment, hiring more employees, and expanding the gym further. Eventually, the gym transformed into something I never imagined. It was no longer a small neighborhood gym, it was a destination. People came from all over the city to work out with us and be a part of the community we had established. We won awards. We were featured in magazines, and we soon became the city's top gym. However, success comes with a price. I felt more pressure as the gym grew. I was constantly working and trying to stay ahead of the competition. I had little time for myself anymore. I began to question whether this was really what I wanted. Sure, the money was good, and the recognition was excellent, but I was losing myself in the process. Then came the second major event, which altered everything. One night, after the gym had closed, one of the trainers called. There was a break-in. I hurried to the gym. My heart was pounding, wondering what I'd find when I arrived. The place had been trashed. The front desk was smashed to pieces, mirrors were shattered, and equipment was overturned. But it wasn't just the damage that surprised me. Someone had spray-painted the walls with threats. "You will never make. It will destroy you. And this is only the beginning," were scrawled in red on the walls. I didn't know who could have done this. I quote, "D never made any enemies. At least not that I was aware of." But as I stood there looking at the devastation, I realized that someone was out to get me. I did not sleep the night of the break-in. How could I? The gym is my sanctuary. My life's work had been violated. The images show shattered mirrors and overturned equipment, and the hateful words scrawled on the walls in red spray paint kept coming back to mind. It wasn't some random act of vandalism. The messages made it clear that this was personal. Someone intended to destroy me, and I didn't know who or why. The police arrived, took notes, and asked questions. However, I could see the disinterest in their eyes. To them, it was just another instance of vandalism in a large city. They were not going to put in the effort required to figure out who was behind it. And I wasn't going to sit around and wait for my case to be added to the list of unsolved crimes. I needed answers. I needed justice. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. It wasn't hard to find one, but it was difficult to trust one. I did not want just anyone working on this. Whoever did this clearly harbored a grudge. I needed someone who could dig deep and get to the bottom of things. After conducting extensive research and receiving numerous recommendations, I discovered someone who appeared to be ideal for the position: Gregory Turner. He was highly recommended, known for his tenacity and ability to uncover even the most deeply buried secrets. His reputation spoke for itself, and after a lengthy conversation, I was convinced he was the right person for the job. Greg was an older man, possibly in his late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a sharp expression in his eyes. He didn't waste time exchanging pleasantries. When we met in his dimly lit office, surrounded by old case files and dusty books, he got right to the point. "Vandalism sounds personal based on what you've described." He spoke while tapping his finger on his notepad. "Who have you recently pissed off?" I laughed bitterly. "I do not know. That is why I am here. I run a gym. I'm not really in the business of making enemies." Greg raised his eyebrow. "You'll be surprised, kid. In my line of work, I've witnessed people being stabbed over a parking spot. There are no grudges. Too small." Greg dug deeper into the case over the next few weeks. He began by speaking with the employees, gym members, and anyone who had been present the night of the break-in. He obtained security footage, examined local surveillance cameras, and even went through my business records to see if anyone I'd recently fired or had problems with could be held accountable. Nothing. Whoever did this knew how to hide their tracks. But Greg wasn't one to give up easily. He was unrelenting. Every few days, he would call me with an update, each one more frustrating than the last. He followed a few leads, but they all proved to be dead ends. He even researched the competition. Other gyms may want to see mine fail. However, nothing concrete came up. Weeks turned into months, and I began to lose hope. The gym was up and running again. I'd repaired the damage, replaced the broken equipment, and repainted the walls. But the fear lingered, the feeling of being watched and not knowing who was lurking in the shadows, not directed at me. I couldn't shake the impression that whoever did this wasn't done. Then one day everything changed. Greg summoned me to his office, and this time he had something serious. I could tell he was excited when he told me to come over. When I arrived, he wasted no time. "I have something for you, and you are not going to like it," he explained, sliding a manila folder across his desk. My heart raced as I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, and notes from Greg's investigation. And there, staring back at me, were the last faces I had expected to see. My parents. I felt as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. This cannot be correct." I stammered and looked up at Greg in disbelief. "It's correct," Greg said, his voice calm but firm. "I didn't believe it at first either, but all of the evidence points to them. Your parents are behind the break-in." I sat back in the chair. My mind is spinning. My parents, the people I'd spent my entire life trying to avoid. For years, these people had tormented, belittled, and made me feel worthless. They were the ones who attempted to destroy my gym. Greg explained everything. He'd started looking into my family history. After all, the other leads went cold. It was a wild guess, but something about my past bothered him. When he looked into my parents' financial records, he discovered that they were in deep debt due to gambling, unpaid loans, and shady business deals. They were desperate for money. And then he found something even more shocking. My parents had been keeping an eye on me since I left home. They knew about Jim and my success, and they despised it. I had escaped their control and succeeded where they had predicted I would fail. I had created something for myself that was too big for them to handle. They intended to ruin me, to take away what I'd worked so hard for. Greg had obtained phone records, emails, and even a witness who had seen my father near the gym on the night of the break-in. It all summed up. I was infuriated. I felt sick, after what they had put me through. They were not finished with me, even at a distance. They were still trying to bring me down. I wanted to confront them immediately, drive to their house and scream in their faces. But Greg advised against it. "We need to do this correctly," he said. "If you confront them now, they will deny everything, and we will lose the opportunity to hold them accountable." Instead, we went to the police with the evidence Greg had gathered to build a solid case, as well as his connections and the evidence we possessed. The police took the situation seriously. They started an investigation, and within a few weeks, my parents were arrested. It hit me like a ton of bricks when I saw their mugshots on the news, hearing reports of their arrest. It was surreal. Part of me wanted to be vindicated, but another part of me felt empty. These were the people who had raised me, and they were supposed to protect and care for me, but they had betrayed me in the worst way. But the nightmare hadn't ended yet. I still had to confront them in court. The lawsuit was messy. My parents initially denied everything. They claimed the evidence was fabricated and that they had no involvement in the break-in. But Greg's investigation was thorough. He had phone records, emails, and witness statements. It was all laid out in black and white. My father attempted to play the victim in court, claiming that he and my mother had been wronged, that I had abandoned them, and that they were simply trying to reconnect with me. It was disgusting. I could not believe how far they were willing to go. They were willing to tell lies to save themselves. The trial went on for months. My parents hired an expensive lawyer who tried every trick in the book to get them out. But in the end, the truth was unmistakable. The jury found them guilty of conspiracy to commit vandalism and property destruction, and they were ordered to pay restitution for the gym's damage. It wasn't just about money. It was the fact that they were finally being held accountable. For once, they were unable to avoid the consequences of their actions. When the verdict was read, my parents did not look at me. They looked straight ahead, stone-faced, as if I did not exist. I hoped that they would show some remorse, some indication that they were aware of the gravity of their actions. But there was nothing. They didn't care. They never had. After the trial, I left the courthouse feeling numb. I had won, but it didn't seem like a victory. I got no satisfaction from seeing my parents punished. I felt more alone than ever. I had finally severed all ties with my past, and I was truly on my own. The money they were supposed to pay didn't matter to me. I didn't need it. The gym was doing well, and I had already rebuilt what they had attempted to destroy. But the fact that they had to face the consequences was what mattered. In the months that followed, I threw myself back in the gym. I expanded by opening a second location in a neighboring city. I hired more trainers, invested in new equipment, and began to offer more courses. The gym was thriving, and I was busier than ever. But no matter how successful I became, the scars of what had happened remained. I tried to ignore the pain and focus on the future, but there were nights when the weight of everything hit me at once. I'd created an amazing life for myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I started going to therapy, which I had avoided for years. I did not want to deal with the past. I did not want to relive the trauma of my childhood. But after what had happened with my parents, I knew I needed assistance. I couldn't bear this burden on my own. Therapy was difficult at first. I did not want to open up. I didn't want to talk about the pain and anger that had been building inside me for so long. But with time, I began to heal. I realized that what my parents had done to me was not my fault, and that I did not deserve the abuse they had inflicted on me. I also realized that my success was more than simply proving them wrong. For so long, I had been driven by the desire to escape, to create something that would prove to them that I was not the failure they had labeled me as. But I wanted to build something for myself. Something made me happy. Something that satisfied me. And this is exactly what I did. 1 year after the trial, I opened my third gym. It was the largest yet, featuring cutting-edge equipment, a juice bar, and even a small spa. It was a dream come true, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly succeeded. Not because of the money or the success, but because I had created something of my own, something no one could take from me. My parents never paid the entire amount they owed. They attempted to appeal the verdict, extending the legal process as long as possible, but it was ultimately ineffective. I'd moved on. I had created a life for myself that was more resilient than anything they could destroy. Now, comma. As I sit here writing this, I feel a sense of calm that I never expected. My gym is thriving, my life is full, and I'm surrounded by people who care about me. People who encourage me rather than discourage me. The road to here was not easy. It was fraught with pain, betrayal, and loss. But I made it. I survived. And for the first time in my life, I feel liberated.